Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another session of Think About It. So, food for thought tonight is who's to blame? Now, you may ask, where did this topic come from? How did it come about? So, here's a personal situation I encountered from two different people, and it made me think about when people point the responsibility of why they're in the situation that they're in or encounter the situation that they encounter, and they tend to point fingers at other people instead of looking at themselves, looking at what we say, look at the man in the mirror. So here's a scenario. Now, again, we know that every situation is different. There are cases in which there may be others to blame, or others had something to do with it, or the environment had something to do with it. So I don't want to disclaim that at all. And I also know every person and every situation is different. But here's how this came about. So I encountered a situation with one individual. With this particular individual, they were very upset about something, and they were ready to lash out. But before they lash out, get this, they said, let me check my heart. Because maybe it's something going on with me that I need to check first before I go, as they said, off about this, as I go and approach someone about this. And I thought that was wonderful how they said, let me check my heart first. And see, what I like about that was they were willing to say, let me step back a moment before I point the finger at someone else. Make sure my heart is clean. Make sure I understand the part I played in this. Now, there was another person, and again, these are two different scenarios and two different people, even two different age range. But here again, we have one that said, let me check my heart. The other individual would not accept responsibility for their part they played in it. They be pointed fingers at other people. They said that, things were not done. People didn't care about them. They were just pointing their finger left and right. And so when it came down to them having a meeting with me, be a little transparent, they came down to have a meeting with me, and again, pointing the fingers at what we did not do. And then they finally had the nerve to say, all right, so you were a clinician, you were a therapist, what would you do? Tell me, and you know how people can be antsy. So nice and calmly, I said, what part did you play in this? And they went, da. Hold it. What part did you play? You pointing your fingers at everyone else. But what part did you play in it? And the person sat for a moment, and they began to make excuses. And as they began to make excuses, I just kept coming back saying, what part did you play in it? We can't read people's minds. We can't read people's feelings. We should not assume. We only know if people open up their mouths and tell us. If you don't open up your mouths and tell us, we can't resolve the problem. Now, who's to blame for the circumstance this particular person was in? Ultimately, they accepted part of it. But the thing that got me was, what was the difficulty in accepting the fact, full 100%, the part they played in the situation that they ended up in? So what is it? We have two situations. We have one situation where the individual, we had the conversation, and the individual said, I need to check my heart before I go after someone else. The other individual blamed everyone, blamed circumstance. We did absolutely nothing for them. And after a couple of times of asking a person, who's to blame? Can I read your mind? Can I read your heart? This is your responsibility. And after a few times of doing that, then the person finally said, okay, you're right. So once that happened, I kept thinking about how people point the finger at other people, circumstances, environment, When are people going to take responsibility for their own behaviors? A lot of times people end up in the situation or the predicament that they're in because of something they did or did not do. Now, as we're moving forward, as you're growing, as you're developing, in order to progress forward, in order to move forward, sometimes in order to prevent the same errors that you've made before, you have to look back and say, how did I get in this error that I was in? How did I get in this situation that I was in? And you look at how did I get there and what can I do differently to prevent that from happening again. We have to get to the point that we stop blaming others for the situation that you're in, for how you ended up. Everything is not always due to your environment. Everything is not always due to what someone else did. Sometimes you are in the situation that you're in merely because of you. Merely because if you look in the person at the mirror, you will realize you are in the situation that you're in because of you. Now, what's the key? Realizing you're in it because of you and what you can do differently to begin to plan to pull yourself out of it. What did you learn from this so that you can't make and will not make those same mistakes again? When are you going to get to the point and say, it's not your fault, it's mine? When you going to get to the point and say, let me check myself instead of pointing my fingers at someone else? When are you going to get to the point to say, I got myself in this mess. This is how I got myself in this mess. Now I need to make plans to get myself out of it. So the food for thought, who's to blame? Are you in a situation because of something you did? Are you in a situation because of something you failed to do? Just think about it. Who's to blame? So I hope this has been food for thought for you to think about as you're progressing and as you're moving forward. God bless. Join me next time for another session of Think About.